Did you know that vampires might not be a curse but a voluntary pact with the devil? In this video, Tales Mythology takes you on a thrilling journey through the Prophetia Sanguinis, the forbidden manuscript the Church tried to erase for centuries. We'll trace the legend from a desperate shepherd in Ugarit, 2100 BC, through blood-soaked nights under crimson moons, to the House of Darkness and the dangerous ritual said to open the gates of the Underworld. Subscribe to Tales Mythology for more chilling, thought-provoking stories about mythology, dark history, and secrets hidden deep within time. Don't miss the legends that shaped our world's fears. Rome keeps its loud secrets on postcards and its quiet ones between mortar and bone. I didn't break into a vault. I signed for a key in the condition that I not ask who had signed before me. The reading room breathes like a chapel, each whisper a transgression. A curator in linen gloves slides a box toward me, as if the weight inside could tilt history. The label says nothing useful, which is the point of labels made by people who fear paper more than fire. Inside, brittle folios, stitched with a thread the color of storm water. The ink is brown to the shade of old tea, but the Mogens live corrections, petitions, and the nervous doodles of men who wanted to be believed by the future. I don't know if they imagined us as the future, but here we are, bringing our phones to a war waged in footnotes. The title appears only once, halfway down a page that doesn't realize it's famous. Prophetia Sanguinis, the prophecy of blood. No flourish, just the blunt courage of a claim that should have been buried under 12 different councils and a bonfire. A side note, in a more confident hand, points to a vanished cross-reference Zechronicles of Eusebius, 325 C followed by a later correction, Eusebius, and then another, Numitid. The document is arguing with its own bibliography. What it argues for is worse, that the thing we have called vampirism began as consent signed line, the binding clause, the most dangerous word in theology, agreement. The writer names no devils we recognize by household brand. Instead, a title, Bolwushik, Lord of Darkness, a bootleg figure from Apocrypha and side alleys of commentary, the kind of name scholars retire with a sigh and a footnote. Let me be clear, this is not proof. This is a manuscript with an agenda, one that knows fear is a better argument than logic. But it is specific, and specificity is the enemy of myth. It locates the seed in Ugarit, around 2100 BCE, a shepherd with too much love and not enough soldiers. No thunderbolts, no theatrical brimstone, just a deal, strength, survival, the entrance of wounds, and the cost paid in other people's blood. Pacts are tidy in stories, in life they take time to work. The scribe describes a liminal illness, 7 nights of fever, and the cold intelligence that follows. Bread turns to ash, figs to sawdust, wine becomes a bitter joke. The body votes blood and wins the election. We should pause Haranaut to relish the macabre, but to contextualize. Across cultures, blood sits at the intersection of medicine and myth. The notion that life lives in blood goes back as far as we can read. Modern scholarship suggests that vampire panics often tracked with epidemics and misunderstood physiology decompose processes, porphyria, pellagra, catalepsy, and the human need to explain chaos with a face and a story. Those scientific frames don't cancel folklore, they explain its persistence. Back in the Mogens, non maledictio sed pactum, not a curse, a contract. I write it down, not because I'm convinced, but because certain sentences change the air in a room. If this were true, if it would pivot centuries of narrative. A curse makes you a victim, a pact makes you responsible, and responsibility breeds cover-ups. The text suggests that guardians of doctrine filed the prophecy under heresy, but under hazard to potent for the ambitious, to destabilizing for the faithful. And yet, what actually disturbs me is not the church politics, it's the inheritance clause. The writer insists the pact sits in blood, transmitted like a surname, and showing itself at maturity. Childhood passes unremarkably. Adulthood arrives with science, light hurts, wounds are slow to forgive, and the appetite edits your conscience. The manuscript names the house it builds, Domus Tenebrarum, the house of darknessless, a clan than a diaspora. Faces many, blood one. You can hear the strategy in that. Monsters are easy to exile. Families are harder to spot. The pages after that are abrasion serifs, smudges, a confession of how much the past doesn't want to be read. But through the scarring, a ritual schematic persists. The blood of the first operates as seal and key. Spill it wrong, in the wrong place under the wrong moon. And you don't just destroy a manu unlocko a seal, the underworld's gate. The recipe is obscene enough to fill theatrical eclipse. Ash, words from a tongue that turned to stone long ago. It sounds like fiction, because fiction learned from texts like these. And yet, real danger loves theatre. Power corrupts, secrecy perfumes it, and nothing tempts like a shortcut through death. So here's the position we're in. Either this is the most elegant hoax a frightened scribe ever penned, or it's a map drawn in red for men who crave the shortest path to empire. If you think that's ancient business, you haven't watched the modern appetite for forbidden knowledge dressed as content. We should also talk about fair use, because if you've watched internet culture argue with itself, you know myths and media feed each other. The law doesn't bless theft. It blesses transformation. You context, critique, meaning, and purpose. Reaction without insight is not a shield. Transformation is. Even popular creators caught in copyright dust-ups admit, case by case, intent matters, but transformation matters more. This video isn't here to repeat a campfire tale. It's here to interrogate a frame. What happens when origin isn't accident boot agency? Cue the refrain, we'll test all night. Cursia contract. History, when it's honest, is a tide of ordinary days interrupted by decisions. Ugarit day. We call the tells and trenches. Rash Shamra wasn't a fantasy map pin. It was a working port with ledgers, tariffs, and the kind of multilingual gossip a coastline breeds. Ideas came ashore with olives and left with timber. If you wanted a rumour to grow legs, you told it where the ships could overhear. We picture a shepherd because the manuscript does, but shepherds in these hills weren't just wool and lullabies. They were economists with hooves, calculating pasture, rain, tax, and theft. Raiders skimmed the coast when empires looked away. When you have mouths to protect and no army to borrow, you start doing math the gods don't approve of. The text insists the ritual was wrong in a very specific way. In this country, most offerings go up smoke as a courier, sent as an envoy. The shepherd pours down into earth that remembers older names. He marks lamb's blood in spirals instead of straight lines. Whether or not you believe in Bolwushik, the choreography is provocative, a petition not skyward to favor, but earthward to leverage. We could say the figure that answers is a demon. The text says presence, not the statue, not a dream. If you're half skeptic, half poet, this is where you listen sideways. Even if nothing supernatural arrived, the man left that night changed, because the center of his decision was agency. He didn't wait for mercy. He signed 4 terms. There's a detail here worth our respect. Language drift. The scribe uses Damkaim blood of life to describe the price and the cord. The broader Semitic world is comfortable with life in blood metaphors. That's not new. What is new in this telling is a reversal. Blood ceases to be a gift and becomes a currency. The shepherd doesn't offer it. He spends it out first figuratively, then literally, with a thirst he did not yet own. We can cross-check the Yiri's religious habits and find no single blueprint for downward rites exactly as described, but we find enough ambiguity to seek the story in the neighborhood. Ancestor shades, underworld gates, high places turn to low when power changes hands. A light old well leans on plausible furniture. A truth that survives censors often misplaces its chairs. Either way, the room we're in is outfitted with objects you could trip over in a Bronze Age evening. He comes home with a new quiet, not triumph, not dread relief. He has done something, and doing is the addictive half of hope. For the next 6 days the body argues. Bread tastes like chalk, figs like the echo of a fig. His wife thinks he's offended a neighbor or a god. On the 7th night, he stands up as if the bed remembered him wrong. His eyes carry coal under the iris. He tries animal blood first, because lines are easier to move when you pretend they're fences and not borders. It helps just enough that he promises himself this is temporary. This is how every compromise writes your diary for you. The manuscript insists there were witnesses not to a miracle, but to a pattern. People begin to sleep poorly near the house. A goat found in the reeds looks like wordless surgery. The shepherd's face forgets to be older. Yet no one can arrest a rumor. You can only feed it or starve it. The village does neither. It hedges. Hedging is culture's real talent. Even if we step fully onto skeptical ground, the mechanics here map cleanly onto how communities metabolize crisis. Across cultures, vampire panics tend to crest when disease, hunger, and uncertainty wobble the floorboards. Medical historians point out how conditions like porphyria, light sensitivity, lesions, and pellagra rash, wasting offered eerie visuals, and how catalepsized bodies cruel stillness scored make the dead seem merely undecided, seeding tales of returners who needed encouragement to stay buried. These don't prove a shepherd's pact. They prove why the story structure works whenever bodies and beliefs run a fever. Contracts create paperwork, not always on parchment. The paperwork here is social. Who avoids whose stall, who starts walking the long way home, which toddlers get their ears covered when a name is said. More than miracles. These are the receipts myths keep, and in the margins of the Folius Omione's cramped Latin, maybe 'tis centuries latethi sentence that changes category, not plot, not a curse. A pact. We're not watching a hex, we're reading a signature that thinks it's solved a problem, and instead built a pattern. Hunger is a teacher with one lesson. Eat. It does not debate the ethics of the classroom. The shepherd tries rulesonly animals, only at night, only when weak. Every rule is a crease in paper the future will flatten. The first time he drinks from a goat he prays in case that helps. The second time he doesn't, in case that helps. By the fifth, he learns that prayer and appetite can share a cup without cancelling each other. This is the theology the manuscript wants us to swallow, not damnation, not in a sense of practice. Neighbors catalogue the cues we've all learned from later novels, but that would have landed here as new dread. His skin forgets son's vocabulary. His strength has the impoliteness of youth. He looks like a man who has slept adequately through a siege, and because shame prefers the speed of whispers, we inherit an economy of euphemisms. He keeps different hours. His appetite is peculiar. His shadow looks long. Again, we put two maps over each other. On one, the supernatural coordinates glow. On the other, medical notes annotate the edges. Porphyria's phototoxic reactions can make sunlight a litigation. Pellagra's dermatitis and wasting trace a slow unspooling that looks like a curse if you don't know your niacin. Catalepsy sells the rumor of return because the body underperforms at being dead. None of this cancels the manuscript's claim. It explains how a hunger story can recruit biology to do its public relations. The moral engineering here is subtle. A curse absolves. A contract implicates, and implication is contagious. If the bloodline clause is real, then children become statutes, not citizens. You don't just inherit a name, you inherit terms. Whole villages will adapt in ways they can swear were entirely practical curfews that have no law, invitations that stop being extended, houses that suddenly forget where their welcome mats live. The manuscript gives him a title that pinches tragedy into its smallest speed. Harishan damned short first blood drinker. First is lonely in every language. It carries within it the grief of the people who will have to be second. He tries wine again, a test. It behaves like a joke he's told so many times. He starts eating in front of people more, not less, because it's safer to pretend he can pretend. He picks up his child and sets him down too quickly, as if his arms forgot how to be arms. His wife hangs garlic because trade taught her to try everything once. At this point, I want to say the thing the manuscript cannot. Even if none of this happened, stories like this are useful. They are curfew kits, grief glossaries, community audits. They teach children how to fear men in a way that keeps them close to home. And for some, vampire folklore becomes a mirror to process mortality and control. Scholars who teach the subject note how engaging with the myth can be a rehearsal for thinking about death without flinching. When the shepherd finally drinks from a human, the text refuses voyeurism. It lists no gore, only the aftermath. A house that doesn't open its door in the morning. A pair of sandals left by the hearth like quotation marks around a life. This is important. Monsters in sensational pamphlets pose for portraits. Monsters in older stories leave laundry. The domestic residue is scarier because it teaches you how to miss someone. Hunger writes liturgy if you let it. The only question left for the manuscript is whether the shepherd's liturgy is private practice or the prototype for a kingdom. Lineages are disciplined myths. They stack faces into patterns. The manuscript says the signs arrive not at birth, but at maturitias, if the pact respects the theatre of becoming. Childhood buys camouflage. Adulthood hands you the bill. Anthropologists will tell you adolescence is where cultures put their training wheels on fear. You earn a new name, a new chore. Sometimes a scar the community pretends is a decoration. It makes sense, then, that a bloodline would announce at the age when desire first starts to negotiate with rule-making. We map migrations across eras, and the phrase from the scribe becomes a cartographer's dare. Their faces are many, their names are many, but their blood is one. On the Aegean coast, their neighbors call them something with a vowel you swallow. In the Carpathians, the name learns to sharpen into strigoi. In Mesopotamia, the old fear kites back under the umbrella of Lilu. We're not cherry-picking synonyms. We're watching how communities anthropomorphize the same feeling, that some hungers arrive pre-laundered as inheritance. Notice how printing later turbocharged this. What started as whisper networks scaled into pamphlets and penny dreadfuls. Stories local to a valley-built empires of fright. The aristocratic vampire of modern literature isn't a documentary subject. He's a satire of wealth and extraction, a mirror for power that drinks and calls it stewardship. But a satire needs a seed, and Prophetia Sanguinis offers one, not the accident of damnation, the administration of it. A teenager in a hill village wakes to sun like knives. 4 months he eats more than seems possible. The village calls him healthy, and then, abruptly, food becomes a translation he can't read. He becomes careful with his mother, rough with his brother for reasons he'd rather not list. He starts sleeping with a coat on because it feels like armor. A girl who always waves stops waving. She starts watching, which is sometimes the same thing with a different verb. The counter reads remain robust. Porphyria can debut around adolescence. Pellagra tracks with diet shifts. Catalepsy frightens families who don't have language for neurological glitches. None of those erase the manuscript. They explain why it keeps finding audiences. Myths thrive where explanations run short, and sometimes they outlive the shortage because they handle emotions better than charts. If the bloodline is real, it solves the logistics of secrecy elegantly. No recruitment, no noisogist heritability. If it's not, it still solves the logistics of memory. You can anchor every new night walker sighting to a family, and families make better file folders than Forg. There's one more phrase I can't shake: Domus Tenebrarum, the house of darkness. The Latin dignifies what the story already did. It turns a scandal into a structure. Houses have rules. Houses have rooms you don't show guests. Houses survive when individual furniture does not. If you want to defeat a monster, you kill a body. If you want to defeat a house, you have to change the custom. That's a slower knife and a smarter one. Let's talk about the ritual no one should rehearse. The manuscript is damaged here, which is either safety or sabotage. The fragments are theatrical, lunar eclipse, sacred ground older than Abraham, a stone altar that learned patience from weather. Ingredients: the blood of the first as both seal and key, ash of a child offered long ago, and words in a tongue that refuses to be pronounced correctly by modern mouths. If this were a modern thriller, we'd shove the camera into the bowl, cue drums, and let a robed chorus hum in Aeolian mode. But this is a documentary about contracts, and the right question is not how. It's why would anyone try? Thrones are boring when earned. They're irresistible when hacked. If the shepherd's blood is the API into death's back office, Ambitious men will form lines and committees. Institutions bury dangerous recipes. This is not always conspiracy. Often it's harm reduction. The same way, we don't hand out schematics for an easily made explosive alongside a history of chemistry. Archivists redact the operational bits, while leaving the cautionary ones. Of course, suppression perfumes a manuscript with temptation. You've seen this online. The video with fewer details than you want generates 10 duets that pretend to have the missing spice. Secrecy is never a full solution. It's a delay. This is where we make a promise to each other. We can analyze the genre how grim was exaggerate, how marginal notes mutate across copious without romanticizing the instructions. The danger here isn't that rituals work. It's that people worken themselves. They want a shortcut, so badly they'll perform anything that looks like one. Imagine a fragment survives on a trader's ring. A cabal thinks the gem was cut from the altar's rail. Imagine a ruler's advisor persuades him the eclipse is an opportunity to shift the balance. Imagine a monastic order that's not sure it believes, and absolutely sure it cannot risk being wrong. None of this requires magic to be dangerous. Humans with motives are enough. If blood can be key, then somebody is always shopping for a lock. We promise stories that breathe through windows where rumor grew lungs. A city ringed by dust. Siege turns calendars into injuries. A notary named Divert keeps the ledger deaths, rations, prayers boiled into ink. When the gates finally grown open, it isn't mercy that enters. It's the arithmetic of hunger and the bad manners of the victorious. That night, Divert writes an entry he never intends as literature. Shadows that did not shorten by torch passed near the field of bodies. The dogs did not bark at them. In the morning he revises himself. Men without shadows would be a trick of flame. Dogs don't bark when fed or beaten. He knows better, and still the sentence stays. Months later, a copyist preserves it, because copyists are romantics about dread. We find this centuries on, and call it a vampire sighting. It might be grief seeing shapes where the brain needs meaning, or it might be what the manuscript warned suffering a signal, not a cause. Either way, the line worked, families kept curfew, children lived. Stories are tools, and sometimes tools bruise. Peasants in a winter valley speak of Arnold Payol, a soldier whose death refuses to stay paid. A local officer compiles testimonies like a medieval podcaster. And Vienna bites. Doctors arrive, notebooks ready. They cut, weigh, and pronounce. The report enters medical debate, because science, too, has a taste for spectacle. Here's what we rarely say out loud. Europe is inventing public health, while still half in love with portents. Physicians argue about gases in the gut and the color of blood under frost. Priests argue about absolution's jurisdiction over a returned debtor. Farmers argue about who will guard the stalls at night. Did a vampire walk? The records don't certify the supernatural. They certify the social technology of fear. If neighbors watch the grave, neighbors watch each other, and a village with more eyes is a village with fewer crimes. The vampire's community audit. Mud amputates names. A medic called Larkspur for the flower his sister once sent moves in zigzags between the living and the nearly. He writes letters when men cannot. Tell my mother the river sounds like her coffee kettle. He stops believing he is rescuing anyone and continues anyway. Night makes a cafeteria of the wounded. You can hear the whispers, pale men not listed on any raster. Boots that leave no wet print, lips red for the wrong reasons. Larkspur files it with the other trench miracles match that stays lit in rain. The bullet that learns to curve. He knows how shock works. He stitches it daily. And still, when he cleans a bite on a corporal's shoulder, he takes a long time to ask which teeth made that half moon. We have thousands of war rumors. We also have vampire bats, real animals that evolved anticoagulants and cleverness in the dark. Cross-continent, a soldier hears vampire, pairs it with hunger, and the brain snaps to puzzle pieces that never once belonged together. It's not stupidity. It's pattern survival. These stories don't verify a lineage. They verify a mechanism. When the world bleeds, we reach for old categories that help us triage meaning. Medical historians remind us how orphan disease masqueraded as demon, Porphyria's sun-hating skin, Pellagra's rash and wasting, Catalepsy's terrible talent for pretending to be Deathel offered raw material foretales. So why keep telling them? Because they work as cautions, as curfews, as community instincts draped in drama, and because somewhere, maybe, a text like Prophetia Sanguinis whispers, look harder, not at the manuscript, the contract. If the terror isn't in the teeth but in the terms, the solution isn't a stake, it's a clause. Every myth escalates. If the father is the prototype, the son is the product. The manuscript's line is blunt. The seed of the pact will grow stronger than its root. The first survives. The firstborn rules. Survival is biology's hobby. Dominion is civilization's. We know this trapeze sequel villain who wears the father's intention a cape and then refuses to apologize. In political folklore, it's the founder's son who loves the palace more than the people. In the vampire's register, it's the child who never knew bread and thus never had to grieve it. He doesn't practice hunger, he administers it. A court without daylight architecture designed by someone who negotiated with moonlight, courtiers who don't know if they're attendants or vintages. The firstborn learns to command without touching. He's less interested in hiding, more interested in hierarchy. Feeding becomes a tax, and fear becomes a currency. The people call him by names that mean king with a cough inside the word. Modern literature amplified this into the aristocratic vampire suit, the ballroom, the deed to your neighborhood's knights. Critics love this figure because he lets us talk about extraction without filing libel. But if you roll the timeline back to a shepherd, the arc from survival to system reads like every cautionary tale about power. The firstborn is not a beast, he's a bureaucrat of thirst. The manuscript assigns him an upgrade compulsion, where the father eats, the son organizes. He learns a form of influence that bends mortals and kin. Whether you translate that as hypnosis, charisma, or admin, the effect is the same. One throat sets policy for all the others. We maintain our skeptic spine. Historical records that smell like him are often allegorith warlord who tied flesh, the noble who demanded first night, the mogul who owns the company town and charges rent for air. You don't need fangs to be a vampire. You need a ledger you never balance. Myths are efficient because they let us name an ethic and a person in a single syllable. If the firstborn exists, he's either a king of night or a parable about the day. Either way, the lesson is administrative. Do not let a hunger learn governance. The longer a manuscript travels, the more pockets it invents. The text hints that Templars, Gnostics, Rosicrucians, illuminations of illumination. It hardly matters which club kept which copy. What matters is the function of secrecy, to make knowledge into status. We can chart how rumors racialize themselves into symbols, crosses, roses, eyes inside triangle sand, how each becomes a brand for the promise of shortcut power. Some orders might have guarded a fragment because guarding is their religion. Others might have tried to operationalize it because results are theirs. Conspiracies don't need medieval cloisters, they need group chats. A redacted file online makes 10 confident commentaries in an hour. Influencers launder speculation into certainty because certainty gets shared. Meanwhile, actual archivists do the slow, unglamorous work of provenance chain of custody, paper analysis, ink dating, cross-referencing language, the sort of diligence that never goes viral because it includes the phrase, "we're not sure yet." We don't endorse the ritual. We interrogate the genre. Why burn a book? Why keep a book? Because erasing danger also erases warning labels. Suppression and exposure play chess with a board that includes ambition for both kings. If you want to keep a door closed, you need more than a lock. You need neighbors who agree doors matter. Time to litigate. A curse argues you acted upon. A contract argues you acted, even if coerced. Between the two lives duress, the legal fog where choices don't quite qualify as choices. Was the shepherd free? If raiders bracket your children, are you consenting or complying? This isn't just theology. It's how cultures decide who pays the tab for harm. If you believe in the contract, You can argue for rescission, tearing up of terms when the bargain breaks the planet. You can also argue for liability, that descendants who benefit from a pact inherit obligations alongside advantages. If you believe in a curse, you argue for exorcism, external, neatly exculpatory. Think of intergenerational debt, not metaphor, the literal kind. A grandfather's small bribe becomes the grandson's closed door. Or think of families that pass down silence the way others pass down china. Myth is a language to talk about inheritance when money isn't the only currency. The manuscript solution is internally consistent. Only someone inside the bloodline can sever it. Contract law sometimes agree standing matters. Outsiders can't cancel what they were never party to. That's a grim mercy. Salvation must be homegrown. And because we live on the internet, a quick fair use sidebar. When we tell this story here, we're not inviting you to repeat its text. We're inviting you to transform it new context, commentary, and analysis. In practice, transformation is the difference between reaction and critique, between duplication and meaning-making. That principle, widely discussed in creator circles, is the thin bridge that lets us examine old myths without copying them into noise. Button. Choose your frame and you choose your tools. If it's a curse, you pray. If it's a contract, you negotiate a breach. Stories that want to be believed offer you forks that feel like destines. The blood is spilled in the wrong place at the wrong hour. The gate audits the wall and finds it wanting. You don't need to see a single horn to recognize apocalypse. It's the bureaucratic kind categories failing. The living and the dead intermixing like unsorted mail. The firstborn stops being rumor and starts being policy. You don't kill him, you comply with him. He doesn't need to feed. Systems feed him. The manuscript offers a thin candle, a child of light who drinks no blood, but bleeds for many. Maybe a scribal Christian gloss, maybe a different math. Either way, note the structure. Inside solution, inside cost. The bloodline must spend what it has to end what it is. The ritual for and making demands a kind of witness the world rarely deserves. Someone who benefits choosing to lose. We choose a third path in practice. You and I refuse to be useful to the worst version of this story. We refuse viral instructions. We embrace slow clarity. We name the real world Pact's exploitations, inherited silences, and rescind them where we can. The supernatural may not budge under our breath, but culture does. Split screen city. Left, crimson Aurora, windows like open mouths. Right, ordinary sunrise, a pair of hands breaking a thin red thread, dew collecting like forgiven punctuation. Whether or not the gate is real, we are always choosing what our blood cosigns. Maybe the shepherd signed. Maybe a scared community wrote a warning and called it history to make it stick. Either way, the tool is in our hands now. Here's how to use it without letting it use you. When someone brings you a suppressed text, read for genre before you read for instructions. Ask what fears it manages, what customs it enforces, who profits if you believe the blood is a key. When hunger knocks in your own house, addiction, debt, the quiet agreements that cost the people you love, ask whether you're treating it like a curse or a contract. One seeks a priest, one seeks a clause. And when culture flirts with apocalypses because they're good television, remember that the smallest rescissions are boring on camera and brilliant in real life. Refusing a cruelty, returning a borrowed lie, closing the book when the page starts sounding like an incantation. If vampires are metaphors, they're economical. They package extraction, elitism, and denial into a single aesthetic. If they're more than metaphor, then the manuscript is correct about one thing at least. We will decide how the reckoning works by panic or by policy. The monsters we inherit aren't destiny. They're paperwork, and paperwork can be torn up.